Tell us what you wish older people understood, what you want to see for the future that you're growing up into, what we can do to better empower you. I want to hear all of it.
I accept that challenge.
There's a YouTuber named Zoe B who I came across claiming to be
YouTube's resident teacher turned video essayist.
And if you know anything about this channel, you know I love to talk about educational subjects. So when I saw her video called "What Parents' Rights Really Mean," I just couldn't help myself. And I'll admit, her perspective on this is so different from mine that it's almost like we're from different planets, honestly. I gotta be honest about this up front, but I'm gonna try and be fair to her. I should say too that many of her claims I think are better addressed by people she's actively criticizing. A lot of this strikes me as mischaracterization, but I don't have to stick up for PragerU. I'm sure their Sheldon Bucks will do that just fine. For my part, I don't think she's really trying to reach out to moderates or conservatives here, but I'll try to give her the benefit of the doubt regardless. Okay, we'll start off with an easy one.
Now, I'm not going to get into the actual legal element of parents' rights stuff because I'm not a lawyer. And again, I don't want to get into the minutia around the legal relationships between children and their parents. I just want to focus on the language.
This attitude of deference to expertise is an attempt at intellectual humility, but the laws and key decisions within them from the courts are not arcane knowledge limited to some elect to view and interpret. If the law pertains to you, it ought not be considered outside your grasp to comprehend. There's this strange thing that happens among mid-tier educated people where they rely on expertise through credential. That's wrong. Expertise is validated through detailed knowledge and compelling argument. You will often meet people who expect you to concede to them based on their degree. But if they have such a degree, they need to prove its worth to you, submitting their expertise to your judgment and trying to persuade you based upon it. Also, the law is not simply a web of regulations, but at its core is the expression of a principle of justice articulated, however minutely or formulaically, by the court. When it comes to parents' rights, some of the guiding principles of justice are fairly straightforward, not as minutia of the law, but as prudent principles of good right order, accessible even to those who are not lawyers. So let's look a little deeper at some of the reasoning the court has expressed in decisions relating to this topic. Prince v. Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1944 said, "It is cardinal with us that the custody, care, and nurture of the child reside first in the parents, whose primary function and freedom include preparation for the obligations the state can neither supply nor hinder." Wisconsin v. Yoder in 1972 said, "The history and culture of Western civilization reflect a strong tradition of parental concern for the nurture and upbringing of their children. This primary role of the parents in the upbringing of their children is now established beyond debate as an enduring American tradition." Parham v. Jr. in 1979 said, "Simply because the decision of a parent is not agreeable to a child, or because it involves risks, does not automatically transfer the power to make that decision from the parents to some agency or officer of the state." And finally, Santosky v. Kramer in 1982 said, "Until the state proves parental unfitness, the child and his parents share a vital interest in preventing erroneous termination of their natural relationship." There are still others, but these cases establish the clear preference of American law in the interest of preserving the notion that parents are the primary authority over their children's life and well-being. As long as it is legal for a parent to be Christian, it will be legal for them to raise their children in that manner. It will be acceptable for them to, out of their sense of concern for their children, take steps to ensure this is the case. The same goes for all other life and belief styles, including those you, whoever you are listening right now, disagree with. But this reasoning from the court is making a structural sort of policy decision here, and good policy isn't about absolute right and wrong. It's about what tends to be truer, more of the time. When there is no cultural consensus around an issue, when it is largely up to the individual intuition on the matter, who is structurally best suited to deal with the situation in a way that is more fair more of the time, social sciences could suggest the answer which, not coincidentally, is reflected in the court's reasoning. In his book, The Ecology of Human Development, social scientist Yuri Bronfenbrenner observes, in order to develop normally, a child requires progressively more complex joint activity with one or more adults who have an irrational emotional relationship with the child. Somebody's got to be crazy about that kid. That's number one, first, last, and always. And further, because each case is different, because there's no one-size-fits-all approach we can slap on to all cases, the people who are, in general, more likely to have a better knowledge of the circumstances is the better custodian of the issue, in this case, the parent. This, of course, doesn't eliminate the possibility of bad or abusive parents any more than that of abusive teachers, but in broad strokes, while teachers and administrators have tens or even hundreds of kids they have to make snap judgments about, parents usually have no more than 5, 12 if you're Catholic or Mormon. Who is more likely to care more about that child and know that child and his or her needs better more of the time? This, of course, is not to even mention the obvious fact that parents love their children in a special way, which isn't even really possible for teachers.
Now, it's a surprisingly controversial position to see children as full human beings who deserve agency over their own lives.
Zoe seems almost infinitely deferential to the child and suspicious of the parent. She should, I think, lay her suspicion aside, but if she were deferential to anybody, she ought to be deferential to the parent, the fully formed adult provider who knows the child well.
Parents' rights means the right to have full, uninhibited control over children.
You can choose to frame this issue as control. It would be better stated perhaps as authority. Who is the fairer, more just, more beneficial authority for the child in general, given that the child's needs have to be guided by some sort of authority? The people who radically love them, I would think, the parents.
In his recent book, Keeping the Kids All Right, How to Empower Your Children Against the Leftist Agenda Without Homeschooling, popular conservative radio personality Barack Lurie gives advice for how parents can successfully indoctrinate their children. And I'm not editorializing here either. He literally says the goal of parenting is to indoctrinate your child.
Okay, so she's taking issue with this guy's using the word of indoctrination, and I'll give her this one. It's a weird and unpersuasive word choice, but what was he trying to communicate through this word? It's not enough to say, oh, that word is scary, so he must be wrong. What's the actual idea here?
This is indoctrination, but it's also the right thing to do. You're the parent, it's your job. Everything you do is indoctrination one way or the other.
The idea is that parents should take pains to raise their children after the manner they think will be good for them, including whatever the parent thinks their eternal salvation might consist of. Is this, as she says, control? Yes. Although, as with the word indoctrination, I think we might be missing the ideas for the word choice. In rhetoric, we might call this loaded language, but I think what she's actually doing here is more like Daniel Dennett's intuition pumping. In his book, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking, Dennett explains that intuition pumps are cunningly designed to focus the reader's attention on the important features and to deflect the reader from bogging down in hard-to-follow details. There is nothing wrong with this principle. Indeed, one of philosophy's highest callings is finding ways of helping people see the forest and not just the trees. But intuition pumps are often abused, though seldom deliberately. The language that we choose, even if it is true, will often reveal the feelings or instinct of the speaker, and this is a prime example of that.
Everywhere you look, it is about control. But when you have full control over something else, not just a responsibility to keep it safe, but a right to use it however you want, shy of actively harming it, That's not how you treat human beings. It's how you treat property. They see children as property.
Parents do want greater control over their children. They conceived these humans, literally brought them into existence, usually love them more than any other being on the planet, and have the awesome responsibility, therefore, to raise them and shape them well, not as smaller versions of themselves, but in a very real biological way, as extensions of themselves. Parents feed, clothe, and house them, as well as teaching them the most fundamental lessons they have themselves learned. These small humans are ignorant, powerless, and utterly dependent upon them, but parents have an innate animal instinct to defend them and care for them, and because of their weakness, good parents always take care to control them. This control can be to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the sensibilities of the parent and the personality of the child, but it is always present. Always has been, and as long as there are humans, always will be. It is hardwired, biological, instinctual, and for us humans, represents one of the most significant relationships of our lives. When Zoe says control, she intuition pumps this control as though it were the control of cults or something, an unnatural and predatory form of control, suggesting this truth of parental control to be a negative thing. But as with the reasoning brought before the court, the question again arises, if not them, then who? What exactly is the alternative?
The language of ownership that Rand Paul and Jill Simonian are using, the language of indoctrination that Barack Lurie uses, the language of training and obedience that Michael and Debbie Pearl use, and the language of control that Moms for Liberty uses. None of this is language you use to describe a good relationship between human beings who respect each other. It's language you use to describe monetary transactions and animals. Parents own their kids, and if the parents don't own the kids, then the state must own the kids. But I don't think anyone owns kids because kids aren't property. They're people.
Since these kids are going to be dependent on somebody, it's going to be the parents or somebody else. They simply aren't autonomous. Yes, of course, they are real people. Of course, they need some sense of autonomy and ought to be treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. And of course, some parents are too heavy-handed with their kids. But the kids are their kids, and they are kids. Once they are autonomous, they, of course, can and should act as such. And if they become more liberal, they are free to do so. But that's where I think the heart of her discomfort lies. Zoe knows that they will more likely be influenced by the education they received in childhood, which is why I think she is so opposed to conceding any control to Zoe, since her position is the norm, the truth, and that's all there is to say on the question. It seems to her only natural that she should seek to exclude and stigmatize conservative, gender-critical, religious, or even just more moderate parents.
Consider how parents' rights advocates talk about LGBTQ issues. Many school districts are passing rules requiring teachers and counselors to tell parents anytime a student changes their gender identity or starts using different pronouns. Because, parents' rights folks argue, parents have a right to know the decisions that their children are making at school. But when parents are so worried about what the school does or does not want to tell them, there's no consideration of what their child wants. What if your child simply wants to experiment with different pronouns to see what fits? They would argue that their child is too young to make any decision about their gender or sexuality, or that their child is being unduly influenced by teachers trying to turn them gay, so the child's opinion can just be totally disregarded. What the child wants doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what the parents want.
The very fact that Zoe thinks that gender identity is something which is legitimate for a child to explore, something which is only natural for them to even know is an option, shows that she's coming at this issue from a certain basic perspective, that the child should be indoctrinated into this worldview that thinks like that. If others are allowed to educate their children how they see fit, they make it more likely that the kids will grow up to embrace their values, rather than hers. In this way, it's not the kids she's advocating for so much as she's advocating against future adults who subscribe to different moral paradigms than she does.
They only care about using those bodies as pawns in their culture war.
And look, everybody is doing that. I think that's why the author she cites uses the word indoctrination. He's trying to strip away the euphemism we so often use. Everybody is trying to indoctrinate and shape the kids in some way. It's inevitable, and Zoe is doing it just as much as anybody else. I would hate to think that this political utility is all anybody sees in a child. And sure, I'll concede that there are some PragerU types who go overboard on this as though this is the ultimate goal of raising a child. But even in the worst case, the parents are the one, again, who actually know these kids, and their attempts to form the kids are always infused with real love for them in particular. If Zoe's vision of the world were true, that she really did have it all figured out and the others were simply intransigent in their faith or their political beliefs, she would have a point. But her self-assurance is unfortunately leading her to a pretty significant intellectual blind spot, in my opinion.
But there's a difference between acting like you care about someone's opinion and actually caring about it. Clearly, he doesn't actually care about their opinion, because if he did, he'd be open to hearing an opinion that isn't exactly the same as his own.
Based on her need to use linguistic poisoning of the well.
All of this is to say that when we prioritize the power of parents to control their children, we actively dehumanize the very people we are allegedly trying to protect.
We can see that she doesn't even really think these parents are worthy of genuine consideration, that although she may not agree with them, there might be something at least intellectually valid in their point of view, valid and compelling enough for them to want to pass it on to their children. And this blind spot, more than really anything in my opinion, makes her seem to me to be fundamentally incompetent as an educator. She may be right or wrong about this or that, but the foundation of her approach is the antithesis of education itself. Aristotle famously said in his Nicomachean Ethics that it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. John Stuart Mill further expands on this idea in On Liberty that he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may be able to refute them, but if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion, nor is it enough that he should hear the opinions of adversaries from his own teachers presented as they state them, and accompanied by whatever they offer as refutations. He must be able to hear them from persons who actually believe them. He must know them in their most plausible and persuasive form. This lack of self-awareness Zoe manifests is, more than any other single factor, the reason people have been losing trust in educators, besides maybe the lack of literacy in the country today. And in my view, because such solipsism is so damaging to learning, parents are right to be skeptical. The effects of this effort to truly understand the other person from their own perspective is in the cooling of passion and the ability to engage in a way which has at least the reasonable chance of influencing people of that point of view.
Maybe this is just one very silly Bond villain of a man who should not be taken seriously by anyone for any reason, right?
Zoe's video is not that. And because it seems like she's not interested in seriously entertaining whatever the parental rights advocates might reasonably think or want, I frankly don't think that she's capable of such an attempt.
The way that these parents' rights people talk about kids is both very weird and actually kind of concerning.
Rather, she stigmatizes, mocks, exaggerates, and generally tries to convince her liberal audience of what they are most likely already convinced of. And while, yes, this perspective is harmful to kids and parents, it's also frankly harmful to the credibility of the teaching profession as a whole. Teachers don't exist unless parents choose to entrust their kids to them. Trust between parents and teachers is an essential part of any good education. If Zoe wants to genuinely build this trust and restore the credibility of her profession, she needs to lay aside her bias, realize that however wrong she thinks parents' sensibilities are, she needs to work with them, not isolate them. I think she may realize that by even taking this small step, she might imply that her worldview is not, in fact, all there is, that there is more to life than just your political perspective, and perhaps even that you don't have to be liberal to be well educated. This is, I think, a bridge too far for her, because with even this simple acknowledgement, her entire worldview, what she sees as justifiable in her dismissal of other human beings, and especially parents, comes crumbling down. If her view is not so self-evident as to be worth stigmatizing parents over, then she has to totally restructure her approach to education, relationships, and even life in general. Her refusal to reassess her worldview blocks her from truly trying to understand and work with parents of the kids she teaches. And one of the most affected by this refusal are the kids themselves. And look, I'm not trying to pretend that the products of a lot of these self-styled conservative education systems won't come out as closed-minded, but they will be no more closed-minded than most of their peers from the public school system, educated by people like Zoe. If I were the top bureaucrat in charge of all state-mandated education across the country, it wouldn't look like PragerU. But as painful as it is for me that my particular vision is not the state-enforced curriculum, I do take comfort in the knowledge that these parents who are educating their kids to be Bible-thumping fundamentalists are at least investing the time and effort it takes to ensure that they are literate. Sure, it's a minimum, but can the public school system realistically claim any superiority in the true paradigm which should be of concern to educators? Basic academic competency, especially in literacy and math. A good educator would thank these parents. They would be considered as allies in the cause, examples even, because the education system is not failing by the metrics of partisans taking issue with aspects of the curriculum they disagree with. It is failing in a far more substantial and fundamental way. The IQ rise, which has been presumed from generation to generation, has, for the first time ever, begun to decline, and we are reaching an unfortunate state of affairs in America where illiteracy is, for the first time in our lives, becoming a substantial issue. While there are many factors contributing to this phenomenon, the simple fact of the matter is that the education system and teachers who are the juggernaut of this system are failing their most basic tasks by any reasonable measure, nationally speaking. At a time where we have a crisis in literacy and basic math, parents who want to be more involved and take more care to ensure the quality of their children's education, even if it be from a perspective teachers don't agree with, will achieve better basic education, which those same teachers fail to provide to them. In this environment, teachers should really be thanking parents who take the time and trouble to pick up the slack of their incompetence. Of course, it's not surprising because, again, parents love their children and are invested in their success in a deep way which teachers clearly are not. But this, I think, reveals the unfortunate fact that we all wished weren't the case. It was ideology, not education or even kids, which Zoe really loved all along.